there exists a constant battle for survival. Welcome, my friends, to Atomics on a Friday, a fascinating journey into the realm of cybersecurity, data, and atomic testing. Today, we shall embark on an adventure with two seasoned experts who have roamed the cyber wilderness for years, honing their skills and strategies. Paul Michaud, a master of cyber shenanigans, has an uncanny ability to unravel the most perplexing digital mysteries. Alongside him is Michael Haag, a cyber threat connoisseur who has devoted his life to understanding and mitigating the ever-present dangers lurking in the shadows of cyberspace. Together, they shall guide us through the complex tapestry of this digital ecosystem, revealing hidden treasures and secrets that will undoubtedly leave us with a newfound respect for the world of cybersecurity. So, dear viewers, let us dive deep into the heart of this wondrous realm, where the forces of good and evil collide in an eternal struggle, and let us explore what it truly means to protect our delicate digital existence. Join us on Atomics on a Friday. There exists a constant battle for survival. Welcome,
Howdy.
my friends, to Atomics on a Friday.
That was getting kind of crazy there.
What happened there?
I forgot to put up our little banner. Got to get the ticker in there. Yeah. How's it?
Figure it out.
Yes. How's it going, man?
We'll live in the dream, as the kids say.
Excellent. Good to hear. I'm glad.
Happy Friday.
Yes. It's happy Atomics on a Friday. Friday again. And yeah, sorry, I was like chilling in the background over here trying to get my font size correct in PowerShell. I was like, how does this work? I needed buttons. And then, yeah, that was a struggle.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, David started cutting out. He must be remote in the Galapagos this week.
Yes.
Calling in.
It's
tracking
tough.
those evasive tortoises.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a crazy week. I'm excited.
Yeah, what are we doing this week?
This week, we are hopping into looking at different discovery atomics, and we will rip them. We will see how they look downrange. We'll see how they look locally. We'll use Procmon, anything that we can locally. I think to look at just kind of like the different variations of like a technique. I think that's really important to see too, of a technique or of like a command line switch. Talk about all these fun things. So yeah, get some coffee, sit back, spin some tires on your El Camino, make it rain. So I think mostly today is just doing it live.
I'm just going to send it.
Maybe we have detection and mitigation.
Actually, I could talk on some of that. I don't think we put it in the slides, but we can touch on that.
We didn't.
It'll be interesting. Maybe. I don't know.
We'll do it. We'll do it extra live. Yep. Oh yeah, who we are. Who are we? Who we are. Michael Haag. If you are new here, welcome. If you have been here before, welcome back. Thank you for showing up and checking this out, where you will learn a lot of random stuff about atomic testing and extremely loud noises. Paul and I are maintainers of Atomic Red Team, along with a bunch of others. And yeah, we're excited to share some fun stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm Paul, as Mike alluded to earlier. Yeah, I think that pretty much covered it.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's going to be a fun one today. I think do it lives are always interesting. And,
yeah.
I think we'll have some fun diving into it and touching on some kind of different aspects of looking at using Atomic Red Team in a different way. So I think it'll be a good time. Let's jump into it.
Yes, sounds good. I just realized my beacon was set up on another machine. Got to find it. There it is. We're good. Don't you hate that when you lose your beacon? All right.
No, I usually don't have that problem.
Your bacon. Okay. Where we at? Where you at? Okay. Next slide. Atomic testing. Let's do it. Okay. So, you want to run first, or you want me to run first? Doesn't matter.
Jump in. I mean, I'll jump in.
Okay.
So, as a threat hunter, one of the things that I think of is trying to think of the different ways in which an adversary or red team can execute certain things. And one of the most common things that pretty much shows up in any report from a breach or deep report, etc., is always some form of like discovery enumeration. Basically, just adversaries trying to collect information about things, and it's a really tough one to kind of track and identify. Now, one of the things we see commonly, which is probably like the same 5 or 10 commands, net domain admins, etc. And it's like, why are we still doing that? But then we think about it, if we only look at the processes that are known, which we should have analytics and detections that look for those. But we also need to understand the different depths that can occur in which could evade those. And so being able to step through and look at those potential different layers and using tools like Procmon and Sysmon and other things like API Monitor from Rohit Labs and Wireshark to look at the different layers that could be used for detection, but then also looking at ways that we could try and prevent some of this information to make it harder for the adversaries and the red teams. And one of the ways that I like doing it is atomic hunting. So basically, when I'm trying to understand a technique or ways the adversary could do it, I just go to atomic red team and I start running tests. I think for me, getting started, one of the tough things was like, okay, I want to go hunt for a thing, but I don't really understand it or how it works or what the different components are. So using things like what Jared and Johnny and Lee from Spectre Ops have done with the capability of abstraction, kind of implementing some of that here, kind of helps. Like you can look at atomic red team for tests on a specific technique, use those tests to run because the work's done for you, and then you just have to sift through and figure out the data points, which you're going to kind of jump into a little bit. And now we're going to look at like, okay, if on Sysmon, we can look at different aspects of data that's collected in Sysmon within EDR, we should be able to achieve the same thing if we can see that at different levels. So we're going to look at kind of two things. One is the standard process execution, like netExe, executing and querying domain admins and domains. And the second thing is using like beacon object files. So things like being able to load those into Cobalt Strike, or in Mike's case, we're going to use Metasploit and see where the standard process isn't done, but the same outcome occurs, which I think we're going to look at some different techniques, but that's kind of like what we're going to do today. So I didn't prep any of this other than I have Atomic Red Team installed and it's going to rip it, but I kind of dug into this, so we're going to do it live.
Yes. If it's not live, it didn't happen.
If you didn't test it, it doesn't work.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, so if you are following along at home and you want to rip these in your corporate environment today, I will post the invoke atomic test one-liner. Boom. And that's for test 8 and 9 on the account discovery local account. I know I feel very professional copying these straight out.
Oh, I should probably.
I was going to ask, are you going to share your screen? Or?
Yeah, I was like, where is it? And then I realized I never actually clicked the button. Seriously, who wants to come on and do all this stuff for us?
I mean, yeah.
We'll give you credits and an internship or something. Whatever you need.
What is it, like CVEs or whatever? I don't know what you need for certs.
Oh, the continuing education credits, like
CEPs, CECs. Yeah. I don't know.
CEPs,
anyway,
yeah.
CPE. Yep.
So let's look at one of the first ones. So in this case, it's actually going to run through probably like 5 different commands. Focus on a couple and kind of like just pull them out. Basically, it's going to, these are again targeting local things, so not like anything within the domain, but who are the local administrator or users, who are the local what could be listed, and different ways in which they could query that information. So we're just going to run this, and it's going to run through all of them, but then we'll take a step back and use like procmon and kind of start to look at some different things we could potentially use to kind of identify this and talk about like different data sources that could be leveraged. So per usual, let's rip it live. Let's see what the output looks like, and then we'll fire up procmon and go from there. So the first one being net, just looking at what's on the account. Actually, what's the first command? Yeah, net user.
Yep.
And the next one being dir of C users, so looking at who's potentially logged in. So when you log into Windows, it will create a profile for you. And that kind of persists whether you're still logged in or not, like it's going to be there. So basically just stating who at some point in time has logged into this endpoint. What's the next one? Command key. Actually, I'm not familiar with this one, so that'll be a fun one to potentially dive into. And then, of course, you have the standard net.exe local group and users.
Now, when digging through troves and troves of data, outside of net user, have you seen Q user or QW Insta used much or often at all?
I've seen it. Not as prevalent from my recollection experience in that activity. It's most of the time net in some capacity.
Yeah.
Basically like your standard 5, like go to any DFA report and the same like 5 net commands or queries are the same ones. But again, have definitely seen those net capacity. So now, if we think about from like a current data source point, like we're looking at like process execution start, command line parameters, etc. So things like net being the process start, and then command line containing like user or local group users being command line parameters. But one of the things we could do is look for things like, okay, well, what actually happens when I call net user? So we'll look at, like, let's fire up procmon and see if there's anything interesting that we can glean from this. And if you haven't used it, it is a really powerful tool that I reference quite often from collections. So let's take a look at it. Current filters are basically none. Oh, I was testing some word stuff, so don't mind that. We'll reset all our filters, and then we'll figure out ways we can sift through and try and track some of this information. So if you haven't used it, this is the capture. So we'll start it. We'll run the test again. We'll see what comes up, and then we'll start filtering. So it will record anything that happens via registries, file system activity, network activity, and threads. We can also do stuff like profiling events, but I'm not going to touch those. So let us fire it up and run the first one. So again, it's going to run through and basically create 4 separate processes. So now let's stop. So because we know what we're kind of looking for to start, we can kind of start to filter it out, because you can see it's collecting basically everything from even stuff I'm not looking for. So we can cheat a little bit and go to what is going to be CMD and kind of track down to the first one. And so that's our process start. Oh wait, host name. That's probably from.
Oh yeah, that's from Invoke.
Let's find. What was the first command?
Net user.
And there's a faster way we could go through this, but we're just going to show you. Okay, so we found the starting point. So we know in our test that PowerShell is going to invoke command prompt, because that's the executor that's specified in the atomic test. Then the sub-parent would, or the child process would be, in our first starting case, is going to be net. So within here, what we can actually do is, actually that's not, what is Eclipse doing? Anyway, all right, well, we'll just go through this. One of the cool things we can do is we can just bulk exclude a whole bunch of stuff. So in this case, we're going to exclude basically anything that happened before we started that and start to filter it out. We can also say, hey, I don't really care about Splunk's forwarder, so we can actually exclude the process name. So now we can start to filter down on some of that noise and only start to care about what we want.
Hey, is there a config that you can transfer for your filters? Like each time you use this, is there a way to import export?
You can import and export your configurations. There are some standard ones that I have, but I generally just every time start fresh, just because I like to start wide and then work my way down. Sometimes, at least for me in my work, if I start to like narrow, I potentially miss something. If I especially don't know like what I'm looking for or have like some semblance, especially if you think like in like a scheduled task or service, that particular process may not be the end process that does all the things that I want. So if I try and keep it whittled to what I'm looking for.
That's cool.
So what was the test we were doing?
NetXE, net user.
Okay. So, and one of the things we can actually do is probably just go straight and make it a little bit easier, because we know we'll filter on the process name and we'll add it to include it. We could also, again, you'll probably see our exclusions there. We'll scroll to the top. So this is going to be the process start. If we jump into this, we can get information about the event. In this case, there is our net user command. So we are in the right vicinity. And so what we could start to look for and filter out is basically look at the different things that occur. So from a network activity standpoint, surprise, nothing's there, right? It's querying local information, so it's not going to have any network activity. We can look at thread activity. So what DLLs or images did it load? Because when a process starts, it's going to need to import those things in order to execute some of its functionality. And then we'll get different information surrounding those image loads within each one of those separate events. So we can start to see things like RPC RT4 is going to be for RPC commands. NTDLL is basically the last layer before going from user mode to kernel mode for API function calls. And we kind of start to step through. And of course, we can see here everything so far was successfully loaded as a result. So we can kind of start to see basically and start to think about, okay, we know again NetXE is going to load. We know it's going to load some DLLs. What are those common DLLs that would get loaded in specific parameters or things? Let's look at potential file system activity. You can see different results where you'll have things like name not found, file locked with only readers. If you're not familiar with these, I would highly recommend the, what is it called? Troubleshooting the Windows System Internals book. It basically sits on my desk at all times and basically is a great reference along with like the Windows Internals books where you could read it if you wanted to, but most of the time you're basically jumping in, at my point, like just looking at reference points from that. So we can start to exclude those things because if it didn't work, I may not necessarily care about it at that point in time. If I'm only looking for things that I know actually happened. So again, being that it's querying something and not executing, we're kind of limited in what we're seeing here, but we can kind of get an idea potentially what it's doing or what's happening. And then again, the same idea occurs with registry, like where it potentially could be querying things from the registry, or reading things from the registry, or writing things to the registry. We could start to dive into that. So starting to break those apart and looking at some interesting things. Now, again, discovery is a little bit tougher in these cases because there's not like a direct securable object that is just the smoking gun, so to speak, right? It's not just blatantly there. So we kind of have to dig in a little bit. But again, if we said, okay, how could an adversary use the same API or function calls outside of net and implement it in something like a beacon? How do we detect that? Well, this is going to be the activity that our EDR is going to detect potentially. So how would we see that? And I think when you were digging into some of the things that you were working on from your BOF side of things, there were some interesting things, especially with DLL loads and looking at like timestamps of those loads. So there's some interesting things that we'll dig into. So that's just kind of like one method to do it. Now, we could also think about looking at different data sources because in this case, the first test, number 8, was specifically calling like net. But test number 9 is going to use PowerShell for querying that information. Now, if we think about this, again, we could target PowerShell doing things, but what data types or what other data sources could we leverage from those? In our case, like 4104s, 41.
Yep.
What are they?
4104, script lock. There's the other PowerShell one.
Transcript.
Can't remember. Yeah, transcript logs.
Transcript. Yeah.
Yep.
So then we can think about how that looks. And then we could go into things like the event logs. Now, not every EDR will consume from the event log. They do consume from RPC, the ETW providers, which are feeding into the event logs. So there could be instances where we get some of that similar telemetry, but it isn't going to be like, hey, let me just go search my EDR for 4104s or for scheduled task creations. Or in our case, like object access. Like it's just potentially not going to be there. So we have to kind of get a little creative. So again, these are going to be locally, but now if we think, okay, what if I had, in some cases where you see a compromised VPN, rogue boxes connected, and you're proxying commands through that, things like impackets or responders, crackmac exec, other tools that could do the same thing. Or in the case of a potentially unmonitored device where you don't know the source, but you're querying on a remote endpoint. So now instead of focusing here, we have to look at potentially the network and network telemetry that occurs, or what happens on the end state. And so that's where like the other questions of like, what was it, 8702, here's test one. So now this is querying for, actually, let me show details so we have an idea of what we're actually doing, because I don't remember. Okay, so now this is the common again, net user domain, net group domain. So now we're going to ask the domain controller. So we could then fire up things, we can reset procmon, and we could also do things like, actually, oops, don't want that. Let me clear my filters, reset, apply, okay. And you know what, just for fun, let's fire up Wireshark to see potentially what over the wire activity we look for. If I had to take a guess, a very educated guess, we're gonna see some RPC.
RP sizzle.
Again, extremely educated guess. Oh, I should probably update Wireshark at some point, but that's fine. All right, so let's see. Let's filter on our DCE RPC. Let's see if I was correct. Bam. The one time I was correct. So now, again, if we think about being lower level, making these direct API calls, whether we're using a tool like an impacket, which uses direct RPC calls and make these requests and steps through. This is what it's going to look like over the wire. So if you have things like Zeek collecting or other things, other telemetry collection tools in NetFlow, this is where you're going to see potentially some interesting data points. So enumeration, the request, and then you have the response. We have SAMR, which gets utilized. RPC is a client server function, which then you're going to have specific methods, functions that get called. So when you say something like enumerate domains, that's going to have a specific function name and function call. And then each protocol actually has its own implementation. So it has a UUID, which is basically a unique identifier or a GUID that specifies that, which you can also see within potentially the Wireshark data as well. So now, what does that potentially look like from our procmon data? Let's take a look. Let's fire it up. Let's start our collection. We reset everything. And stop collection. And again, what are you going hard on that mech?
Sorry, dude. I'm trying to log into my
rattling away
domain account over here because my net user domain isn't as cool because I'm not logged in as administrator. So I'm like, I can't remember the password.
Okay, so we're back at net. So I never remember what it is we're actually doing. Okay, so let's look at process name. So right now we're focused on what net did, right? What net.exe did. If we're looking for things like it making a specific network connection, we're not going to see it because it's not responsible for that. So we'd have to look at potentially those calls. So what we could do is start filtering out and remove net. And let's see if we can track what happens. So Splunk, we don't care. Chrome, we don't necessarily care. But now service host, right? So let's exclude Chrome. Let's exclude Splunk. And again, we took a wild educated guess in saying that it was going to invoke over RPC. We could jump in and see what these are. So in this case, this is going to be DNS and DNS. But then again, we see existingly what's already been loaded from a DLL, as well as you also get the stack of potentially what was called. So this is great data points to jump into to try and start understanding what explicitly happened. Now, are these two related? Don't know yet. We could dig in deeper. But in my opinion, our current best bet is thinking about, because it's a remote call, right? We're querying the domain, is that the network telemetry is going to be better, or focusing on potentially event logs from the domain controller itself, because we may not have the agent or whatever on the device that actually endpoint that called that. So looking at these things, we can start to see how we can start to look at different operations that were executed during that function call. That's kind of like how I start, is using atomic test, run through them, and stepping through like what actually occurred and trying to then piece it together and look for commonalities. And one of the things that I like to do is use different tests and see where there's variance. Like how are they different, but where is the similarity lie? Most of the time, it's usually certain network points, but also some secure objects. You think about how you can create a scheduled task in the different ways, and you look at all the different atomics. But at the end of the day, most of the time, it's going to rely on the XML file and see Windows tasks when you result in those registry keys, so your securable objects. Then, of course, if you're going to do something over the network, so remotely create a scheduled task, you have RPC call, just like we're seeing here, but it's going to have different protocol implementation or execution from that. There's different points of what we're trying to find that we could use and kind of start to then dig in and dive to it. Now, what you have, Mike, is an interesting implementation, because now we're getting into that again. We don't know who called it. It could be sitting locally on the endpoint, or it could be on a remote endpoint. But what we're probably going to see is we would see similar, almost identical activity. And so let's take a look at that side of it as we dig into potentially running procmon on your.
Yeah, I actually didn't think about running procmon, but let me go grab it.
How do I get out of this VM?
Come on, let's find it. All right. Boom. Stand by. Yeah, that's actually administrators group membership. I am the administrator. Okay. Stand by.
The old classic, you need to be an admin, but I am the admin.
Yeah.
Where's the memes when we need them?
I know. Okay, let's see. Where'd it go? Proc, where are you? There you are. Okay. Run as administrator. There you go, buddy. Okay. Stop capturing. There's a lot of evil going on here, so clear. Feel like I was in an operating room. Okay, let me add my system. Window. This one? Yeah. Okay. You're here. Okay. Cool. Let me close that. Can you? I don't think we could share two things at once, right?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So that would be neat.
Yeah, I don't think
try
I
that
can.
out next time.
Okay. Well, I think what I'll do is I'll run, and then I'll switch to terminal, and we'll go from there. Okay. So as you were talking about it, I had a couple questions, maybe not really questions, but just some like thoughts.
Observations.
Yeah, there's the right word.
Observations.
I was observing a few things. So one thing I was thinking about was when somebody runs net user, and I remember a while back, this was kind of like a topic, because it was like, oh, like when you run net exe, obviously it'll work. But I thought there was a report about how like an adversary was running net one exe, and it reminded me just how it reminded me of a few things, just like understanding, obviously all the different things on Windows and all the binaries and whatnot. But it reminded me about, just kind of like, you got to kind of watch every little piece of angle here. And I found this little Sigma rule. And when I was like, yeah, it makes sense. Like go after both. Look for both, obviously, and then Sigma has it in here for like original file name, so that if somebody's either renaming net, you'll kind of catch both. And then appears my Splunk is gone. I didn't have it on the right place, but yeah, it just kind of reminded me of that. Now, Paul, I can't remember the differences between net and net one. Do you know off the top of your head?
That is a great question.
Okay.
That I don't remember.
I guess I had. Oh, I was running test on a different machine. That's running, killing it. Okay. Well, I don't have Splunk access on this box, but I do on the other one. So, yeah. So yeah, there's that. But yeah. Anyway, so that was kind of interesting. I think what I was doing was just testing net manually. Escape characters too. Yes. Oh, yes. Yep. Tapping in like carrots and things like that. Thank you for that. And then it also reminded me of just how like you could easily like shorthand some of these switches. And that was kind of a thing for a hot minute too, because you don't have to type domain. You could just type dom or do. And I would say you could do /d, but you actually can't. It actually, because there's also a delete. So, but yeah, anyway, I think the shortest you could do is do. And then you could probably, I don't think you could do hyphen. Yeah. I wonder if you could do like the other slashes. Anyway, I have a lot of people in my environment. I don't know if this is a real environment or a fake environment anymore these days.
It's only one way to find out.
Yes. Just open it to the internet.
That's right.
Let them have at it. Okay. So there's that. Is that what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say the interesting component is that in your test and my test, both net and net one were in the procmon logs. Now, I'd be curious to see, like, when we pivot into Splunk and start looking at some of the more Sysmon EDR style data, what we could potentially glean or triangulate from. But whether we run net locally or remotely, it still looks like it will make some form of an RPC call, which we didn't dive into. But we can kind of use that as a jumping point and say, like, okay, it's going to make it locally because just like on an endpoint, you have a client requester and a server that's going to implement that functionality just like you would on a remote. It's just local versus remote. So.
Yep. All right, let me go get. Where'd it go? I'm confused. I have two machines happening here. Too much action. Okay, run as administrator. All right, we'll do this in just a second. Let me get that one over here. All right, we'll show that in a second. You bring this over. There we go. So this is all the net stuff. I was running the same test that you were running. I was just, just running the invokes like this. Test numbers 1 and 2 for the domain, which are not going to work because I'm not cool. And then here's the show details for both of those, just like what Paul did. And then I'll hit 8 and 9 for local. And then you can see all the local groups and users and all that fun stuff. So same deal. And then you see what I was just showing in Splunk. So here's all the runs. You should see you might see the other machine. There's too much data in this environment. But yeah, I filtered on net and net one because we may see, because I was running some of those commands straight as net one, and you can see those net user groups, and then
look at those spacings though. Like, see your spacing between, like, you have some variance.
Yep.
And so how many of those detectors would potentially be broken or analytics based on potential extra spaces, carriage turns, etc.?
Yep. I just realized those other nets are not showing up in here. So let me net user.
So put in a random flag. Yeah. So,
Let's get some extra spaces. We'll see how long that takes to show up. There's like suspicious encoded commands running. Thank you. Okay, that might take a few minutes to show, but that's the last 15 minutes. I think our DOMs are not going to show up quick enough, but that's okay. So
Good data.
yeah. Anyway, so there's those. Okay, I'm going to switch to the BOF stuff real quick. And I might need your help, Paul, to kind of show the back, kind of like the actual like back end of the BOF piece here.
Sure.
Let me open up the trusted sec one that we were looking at. Bring that over here real fast. So what we did is Paul and I were talking. We wanted to show something a little bit different, and in this particular case, we wanted to show it either with like Cobalt Strike or, and I don't know. I just didn't feel like spinning up Cobalt Strike. But then I started thinking, so I Googled, and then turns out you can actually run these with Metasploit now. It came out in a weekly or in a recent, maybe not too recent, but let me find it real quick. Metasploit BOF. Here you go. Oh yeah, it came out last October, it looks like. So let me share that here. And that was in 179 in October. But the idea is that you can use the similar beacon object files that like Cobalt Strike would load. I'm not 1,000,000% familiar with these. Mostly don't play in this realm, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. The biggest thing, like the short thing that I do understand is that a lot of these will use native or WinAPI so that there will not be command line, or say you run who am I using the trusted sec one here, you won't see like who am I spawn or run or anything like that. So it's completely, I don't want to say invisible on the command line, but I guess that's the right word. It's invisible in the command line. So you have to find your other methodology to go back and identify these things running. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're basically, again, taking that idea of, I don't know who executed it, but assume that thing executed. And so that it's, I don't want to say in memory, but it basically loads up the DLLs that it needs, imports the functions to make those calls, right? Just like, net.exe, it's going to import some libraries. It's going to then make some of those to expose those APIs in order to make those function calls. And the BOF kind of does the same thing, right? Like you know which API calls need to be called in the order in order to achieve those, right? So if you go to, in your case, you have who am I, but there's also examples for the net stuff that we just executed. So in the case, you can see that it's including specific header files, which are going to expose some functionality. But if you scroll down, I think I remember taking a look at this one, and I think there's like ADV API 32, there's kernel 32. So now what you're going to see is whatever Mike's process is called, that's going to, once that BOF loads, assuming that those DLLs already aren't loaded, they would then, at that time of execution, load them up and then make those API calls that it explicitly calls. And so you would see those. So I think you actually show like the different timestamps of when those DLLs get loaded in the one Splunk instance.
Yep.
Which is kind of an interesting thing. Now, you won't explicitly see the API call, but you can get an idea of like certain things. And this is almost standard normal process, right? Think of like a long-running process like Explorer or Chrome potentially that hasn't closed down in 4 months and starts to do some things, and it starts to load up DLLs, or even like web servers. It's another great example where they're long-running, and over time they'll potentially load up DLLs as they need them because they're not going to potentially load them all at the same time.
Yeah, this is really neat. I had never played with these before. Oh, wrong one. Let me click on this one here. And so I ran a few of them for kicks and funsies, and I think that's kind of one thing I'll run live here in just a second. So here's our net, and then over here we don't have anything today, so I guess we could do both. I'll show you what I did before, and then what we have going here today. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to share the terminal somehow. All right, just rips that one right out of there. Let's go here. Okay, so right now I am in Kali. I'm on my Kali instance, and I'm Leet Haxor. I use a resource file. I don't know if many people use that or know about it, but it's as simple as like you just set a bunch of cool settings and it just makes it easy. So you don't have to like start the handler or do all these different things like localhost, local port, things like that. I've had it on my gist for like 100 years and I just reuse it over and over because it's life-saving. Oh, you can see my nice history up here because I fail at things. So yeah.
Cheating? Are you trying?
Right. Yeah. It's like, does this work?
I'd rather press the up arrow for like 20 minutes to find that one command than try and figure it out or Google it again. So yeah, I'll take terminal history any day.
Yep. Let's just let this load. Metasploit loads up. Let me see if I can add a second. Nope. Wow, that just burns that right down, doesn't it? Okay. Reshare. Okay. Yeah. Let's go here. There we go. Metasploit's loading. I guess I should have had this ready to rock, but I did not. Okay. And then over here on the other machine, I'm going to get... So I have a payload I generated. I just used the kind of basic stuff for Metasploit, interpreter, MSF Venom, kind of like standard stuff. Once this loads, I might be able to show more, but come on. Maybe. Okay, here we go. All right, so note the handler started. It's all ready to go. It runs all my resource stuff ready to kind of out of the box there. I'm going to click on the aoaf.exe on the back end over here. And there it is. And if you have not used Metasploit before and you want to interact with your session, it's as simple as session interact. And you can actually tab complete through these. So if you have 100, you could just do like tab completes.
If you have so much shells and you can't keep them straight.
I'm sure you could like leave descriptions too. I don't know. I haven't gotten there.
We'll leave it for the hackers.
Yeah, exactly. Leave it for the leaks.
Pros.
Yes. I don't know how deep I'll get, but Meterpreter, you can just run help. This is running as an administrator on the other machine, so I'm already like admin. There's not, if you needed to escalate your privileges, you have to go through other like rounds of hacksoring. In this case, I'm already admin. I don't need to hacksor my machine right now. So yeah, I just ran help. You'll get all these details. If you're not admin, you'll get a limited set of details. You have to figure your life out and how to pwn the machine. So you can see all the things you could do. Now, what I'm going to do now, I mean, I'll just run something for fun. I don't know. This is going to be a little, oh yeah, because I'm already, oh yeah. Did I write it? I thought I did it right. The parameter is incorrect. How do you get it incorrect? Well, double hash dump. Okay. I guess that just doesn't work. I know it's going to complain that I'm already a system, so it's like,
oh yeah, no, you are a system.
I am the system.
Named pipe impersonation. Well, that's good.
So like obviously the other thing is you could do like shell, and it drops you into shell, and you could do who am I, net user domain, which is all those users.
But in this case, you just actually left those processes, right? So they're gonna have a sub.
Yes.
You'll have So
this is actually a really good artifact for sure. Let me exit back out into Meterpreter. Okay, so actually, let's quickly. I'm just gonna shift back to my other machine because that's a really good point. I think that's a really cool artifact that we just left there. So adversary just ran net from that session. And so what we have is here. Let me flip this, sorry. Let's do command line, parent and process and time. This is going to give us our command lines and all that. So the lineage rate is going to be AOAF command, who am I? So it's kind of like a little chain here. But yeah, that's my nasty, noisy artifact here for the moment. So now let's become elites and load some boff. Go back.
If you're not
Here.
boffing, are you trying?
Yes. And this is where I'm going to tab up because I already forgot the command. Oh yeah, something I did learn is you could do PS Explorer or PS LSAS or whatever, and then migrate. Oh come on, sorry, migrate to that PID 17.1.2. But I don't know. I'm gonna stay in here. It was dying earlier, so I'm just gonna run this. So go back, tab up. All right, load boff loader. And you got my sweet errors. I didn't have not seen that before. But yeah, so now you have your off screen. So then from here, all you have to do is, well, I guess the part that I did not share or show was the fact that I had to git clone the trustsec repo down. And so now all I have to do is run a simple one-liner. All right, real quick, back up. So I just execute boff, and I give it the path of the one that I'm going to run, which is the who am I. My machine, for whatever reason, won't run the x64, so I had to run the x86. So I did that. And then here you go. All the same type of data as far as who am I provides. Now I could go back to shell, run who am I, and then I get this. This obviously provided a little bit more granular data set, group info and whatnot, privileges.
In your shell, run whoami/all.
Yes, there it is.
There's like your identical output. So that parameter is basically just passed into the API that gets called. If we went into the trustsec repo and looked at the source of it, we could find where it starts and then look at the parameters that are called, right? Because it's using and exposing the same API calls that net or whoami is going to use. And then when you add those parameters, it's basically just appending within the parameters that get specified for that API call. For them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep, cool.
You're a lead programmer. You probably have better tools, but hopefully you all are getting the idea.
So we just left more artifacts on that /all, and we should see it hopefully soon in a few minutes. But the one thing that we are not going to see here is the boff command line that was ran. So I just realized you're all still looking at this terminal. I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to switch back over to Splunk real quick. Render, go here. All right. Okay, so now you're back on Splunk. Okay, so let me refresh. Hopefully we see a /all. Nope, guess not.
Because you're just filtered on your AOL.
Yeah. Let me go.
But you did go into.
Should show the child proc of it, but.
Yes. Should have. Don't know why, but.
Yep. There it is. So here's our who am I /all. Yeah. So there's all that. So the tricky thing here with the boff is, again, it's using those APIs, and if we didn't run all the who am I's and whatnot, we won't really see anything ran on that command line. Let me go back to my stats. So let me remove this. Okay. Yeah, killed everything. We're not going to see anything. And so what I'm going to run real quick on the back end here, back on the terminal, I just don't want to keep switching back and forth. I'm going to run another one that I did just because I want to show a couple things here. Actually, where is that other one? Well, I'm going to have to YOLO if I don't save it. Oh, yeah, tab up.
Tab.
Standby. So yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the Active Directory Certificate Services boff, and that one loads up the interesting little DLLs. So it's kind of a little bit more obvious. Yeah, it gets a little more obvious when here it is. Let's see if it runs. Yep. Okay. All right. It found 0 in the domain. and it says that it was successful. And I can show this in a second when we switch back. Okay, so the idea of that one is, say, it's enumerating the domain for certificate services running in the organization. So now I just ran it. I'm just going to show us here. There was no other in particular like things that had spawned off of that. So the time is 5:52 on this machine. We haven't seen anything for 52. There's like no commands, right? And so the first thing I thought was, well, let's back out here, and what's this one? What should have happened, right? And the first thing I thought was, well, as a threat hunter, I need to look at module loads, because the module loads are going to be kind of the key piece that tell me what's going on, what was loaded up, and everything like that. So I was just curious what that was saying. Let's switch and go back here real quick. It's in there somewhere. I don't feel like typing.
It's there. It's around.
This is my tab up. Oh yeah. So for whatever reason, our TA is like, it trips out by putting the module loads inside the process name field. So sometimes, you know what? I don't think the data showed up yet. Yeah, my environment's a little wrecked. Okay. Let's go back to yesterday, because I did it yesterday.
Run for a year.
Yeah, I'm running for
data in there?
all data. Okay, so this is yesterday. It's the same data mostly, but this is what I wanted to see was, so we see by time, I see AOAF, and then it's going to show us all the different module loads it had performed. And so as I was digging through this after running a few of these, in particular the ADCS one, I was like, yeah, like what am I going to find? What am I looking for? And as I was kind of digging through here, it's probably not going to be on this first page, of course. Actually, I got another trick up my sleeve. Let me find it. I sent somebody this in Slack.
I don't think it was me, because I don't remember what this trick was.
What? It was a screenshot. It was you. I will find it.
No, I don't think it was.
Yeah. Well, it was on Twitter at least. So it's cert ca.dll or cert cli.dll. Basically, when it ran and it loaded the ADCS stuff, it loaded these two DLLs, which pretty much signified that fact that it was performing some level of certificate services type of querying or whatnot. And of course, everything is just a mess today. Might just have to bring the screenshot up.
Good enough.
Yeah. Anyway, it's on Twitter. But so the idea is that like you could go back to, this is the one I ran, ADCS enub. You could go here, and similarly, you'll see the functions that it's calling, and we should see eventually, if you dig hard enough, the actual, the pieces in here with crypt32. You should see that in Splunk as well. But that's the crazy part about BOFs in my brain, in my mind, is that say adversary gets on your system, they run like the who am I BOF. There is no like parent process lineage. There's nothing else here. And that's where like the tricky part with looking at module loads is not everybody can just dump mod loads into like a SIM or anywhere really. And, you're really hoping for the best, and that EDRs can track and check these things are in memory and all that. It's kind of a whole wild west of evil flair. Which begs the interesting hunt, right? Is now you're hunting for mod loads.
But are those so in the case of like the ADCS one, that one's a little bit different because the frequency in which those two DLLs get loaded compared to like what was the one, like ADV API 32, that gets loaded pretty much by anything and everything. So that alone isn't like a smoking gun. But there are cases like in ADCS stuff, like that's a little bit easier to narrow down and sift through and baseline, because not every process should just be loading that up. And so,
Yeah.
well, again, everybody always hates the term baselining the environment. It's super critical. And you look at even recent things like the Azure breach that occurred, and they basically was busted because the admins were like, hey, this user string should never be in our environment. What's it doing? Right? Like,
Yeah.
that just shows like the importance of potentially baselining and really understanding it. But then think about like all the things you could do in memory. Like we touched on 2 potential things. There are so many, but then again, the idea is that no matter how you implement this functionality, it needs those resources. So when you're sitting there going, is this thing suspicious? And it has, I don't know, 200 DLLs loaded.
Yeah.
And you start to see like these weird timestamps of when they're loading and like the grouping, and you start to cluster and start to identify those images. Like you kind of start to paint a better picture. But stepping through like manual code review and kind of just understanding it, like I'm not a programmer, so I don't know it, but also being able to see like what that data looks like in different tools like the Procmons and the Wiresharks and the Sysmon, right? If you can do it in Sysmon, you can do it in a commercial EDR.
Yeah.
Like Sysmon's great, and it has some other functions or data sources that don't get collected by some EDRs. But if you can do the generic stuff in Sysmon, you can 100% do it in your various EDRs in the world.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, when I was messing with this, I had asked you, I was like, how do I load a BOF? And but these would be really cool. I know, I was like, these would be really cool to get into Atomic Red Team, because I think it's just another layer of testing that we don't have in Atomic today. But we need like a BOF. We need some kind of BOF loader, and I haven't dug into it. I think that'd be really cool to bring these types of things in.
Maybe somebody from Trusted Sec could probably clarify this, but maybe like something like a standalone cough loader, I think is another tool. Again, not super familiar with them, but there might be a standalone mechanism to actually do that. Because I think, again, like to your point, like we have a lot of these tools that can do it at depth or like breadth, but we don't have a lot of things that potentially go to depth of like, whether it's a Win32 API call, a native, right? Or even doing like some things like RPC. But
yeah, that's the piece, is like we don't have a lot of native things in Atomic that are going to, run like, say, a BOF or whatnot. Yeah.
But we have our amazing sister project, Atomic Test Harnesses, which do go into some of those depth execution steps. So I think there's a good overlap there. But one of the things in which we'll go into detection mitigation, which is mitigation being, if we go back to the Wireshark example, and we saw that, if you caught on, SAMR was one of the protocols used.
Mm-hmm.
There are things like NetCease as a PowerShell script, and there's other tools out there that will actually, using access controls, restrict who can query that. So it would limit like just anybody being able to blanket go across and query this type of information or additional type of information from tools like AVE-NUM from Impacket or CrackMat. Things of that nature, or limiting SMB ingress. Like a lot of the tools like the CMEs and Impacts of the world rely on SMB for communication via named pipe. So by limiting those things, like there's different things that can be done to mitigate that activity and make it a little bit harder for them. Again, not foolproof. Are there ways around it? Sure. Are there different mechanisms? Probably. But again, like layering those defenses and taking all those opportunities it's critical in stopping some of this. No, I think these BOF things, like I totally forgot that the BOF loader in Metasploit, so that just kind of opens the door. And then of course you have like a lot of open source C2 frameworks implement some of this stuff already. So like it's already just baked in functionality where you may not need it. But I think being able to just go and look at like a BOF of how you could implement that from just a pure API call standpoint is super valuable to just kind of digging in and then just running tests like this.
Yeah, this is that like intersection that gets very complicated for defenders, right? Because it's like, if you're trying to find these things, you don't have the right telemetry, it gets extremely hard. And I hope, like, we're not experts on this, so I hope that others realize that a lot of blue teamers don't understand this, and that's okay. Like, we're trying to raise the awareness of what a BOF is and how to use it. So here's our quick interpretation of loading it and checking it out with Metasploit. Because it's complicated. I definitely
the hackers. We'll leave that to pros, but we'll take the data when we can get it.
Yep, I know. It's just it's a hard concept, but it's easy when you're just looking at EDR, that telemetry all day, and you look at the mod loads and you're able to see by process. Like oh yeah, it's always these standard ones with PowerShell, but all of a sudden PowerShell loads, something related to ADCS. Well, that was just the admin, querying ADCS or adding a new server or removing or something, right? Like there's so much that happens with mod loads, and it's hard. But like I tweeted, if you are looking at, say, a binary running out of app data, the user's profile somewhere, and it loads up ADCS DLLs, that would be of interest at that point, because it's like, why is that happening, or why is there some true executable running from that place loading those, or not, right? Like, say it's an actor migrated into, like I was kind of showing on my screen, like what if you migrated into Explorer, and all of a sudden Explorer loads up these DLLs, and now, it probably looks normal in a lot of instances sometimes, but this would definitely stand out. But this is like that stealth, that adversary stealth piece here that is really hard to go after. Hopefully you get them at the initial access.
Yeah, and the key point being that, again, those basic detections, I don't want to call them basic, but like they're kind of like the standard things that we should all have at this point now, knowing that you look at in your report and it's basically the same 5-10 discovery commands. Have those, like, because they work, they win. Like, adversaries are doing them, we see them and have seen them so many times over now. But it's also important to realize, like, that's not the end all be all, and having that detection alone isn't going to detect that activity. And so we need to go for the depth of our detection and being able to hunt those things and understand. And, in your work with the IIS modules kind of enumerated the same idea. Like, okay, when the IIS server starts and it loads its resources, right? And then all of a sudden, 17 days later, this random new DLL that was written to disk 4 hours ago is now loaded in there, and the timestamps are not sequential. Like, that's interesting. We can do some similar activity, and obviously, like, there's some sifting and kind of baselining word again that can be done.
Yes.
And at least start asking those questions.
Yeah, and this also reminded me, this is a good plug for Thinkst Canary, for their Canary tokens. The sensitive command token here, you can use this as a way to trigger on, like, a sensitive command, or a high fidelity event occurring, like typically KList, or maybe there's an instance of net that is just never ran on certain endpoints across the fleet. Like, you could set these traps to get, like, that early warning. I'm trying to think of, like, NTDS util. Like, why would somebody run that on any other endpoint? Or, who am I all of a sudden starts spawning and things like that. Like, these are a really, really cool way to go after, catching that adversary fast. I don't know if you dropped that into the chat, but I will. Boom.
Good stuff. I think it's interesting in that we can use similar atomic again to take the idea of, I don't know that technique, or I want differences in technique and understand the different things get loaded. What are the APIs or the DLLs that get loaded? What are the network connections, right? What is the different interactions with different inter-process communication, especially whether it's local or remote, like using atomic to just have that starting point of the test, right? I think a lot of times defenders are like, I want to go hunt X. You don't know where to start or have a way to reproduce it, right, in a controlled manner. And I think that's where, like, again, not necessarily focusing on I'm validating my data source collection or detections, but I'm using it to control it so I can then step through and cheat the system a little bit because I know what to look for. I can start digging in to kind of identify that. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing that we could probably start to bring in more of and look at different techniques and look at analyzing and breaking it down, and then using Sysmon and EDR to go through it. Our demo.
Yes.
You gotta fix that GIF. It's so upsetting.
I know. I even forgot to finish add the correct items here, but hey,
that's fine. We'll get
what you get. But yeah, hopefully that was really interesting. There was a lot of depth here today, so it's probably worth rewatching a few times. And yeah, thank you all for joining and listening and staying as long as you have. I really appreciate it. Happy Atomics on a Friday, and we'll catch you in 2 weeks. See y'all later. Happy summer camp.